Okay, everyone, welcome to the Respect the Math podcast, brought to you by Reliable Tech Help. For all your IT needs, call Reliable Tech Help at 502-797-7399 or visit our website at reliabletech, that's T-E-K, help.com. I'm your host, Digital David Snyder. Here at the Respect the Math podcast, we talk about everything from technology to business, science, popular culture, and more. Basically the things that I'm interested in because I'm kind of selfish that way. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and podcast apps from Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, iHeart, and others. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and or share it with your friends on social media. Today, our guest is Lisa Lee.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Lisa's with the Genesis Shop, and she's going to tell us more about herself and her business.
Okay, I'm Lisa with the Genesis Shop. I own the business. It's locally owned. We're not franchised, and I started the business. We're going to be 12 years old this October. And I basically started the business because of a family problem that we had with substance abuse. One of my children suffered from opiates, and way back 15 years ago, people didn't know what opiates were going to do. Mm-hmm. And he had a tract injury, and they prescribed him opiates. And then about a month later, he had all 4 wisdom teeth pulled, and they prescribed him opiates, and he went down that rabbit hole. And through that period of time, and trying as a parent to navigate the treatment community and getting resources and helping, it was just an uphill battle. There's such a disconnect between the problem and the resolution. So I saw a deep need for prevention in our community. So that's how Genesis kind of got born. I saw that we needed to kind of help and see what was going on in the community. So I reached out to a nonprofit called Operation Parent, and they work to let parents know what their children in middle school and high school are doing as far as like sexting, drugs, alcohol, curfews, all of those things that parents are facing. So I partnered up with them and said, let's start some prevention. So I resourced in-home drug testing kits. And, it's a hard thing for a parent to drug test a child, but it has to be done, particularly in these days and times, because they're exposed by the time they're 9 years old. So through that process, I had parents saying, well, can you come talk to us at my business? And so I started doing some speaking engagements, and then employers were asking, well, can you help me write a drug-free workplace policy? And at that point, it's like, wow, there really is a disconnect here in the community. And so I began writing policies, and, well, what can we do now to prevent? Now that we have a written policy, it's like drug test. We're not trying to catch anybody drug testing, but we're trying to prevent and watch for signs and traits. Had I known as a parent what the signs were and, all the little paraphernalia that was around, that, something as simple as my spoons were missing is a trigger. And empty pen, cases and casing, taking the ballpoint pen out, that's used to, snort all kinds of substances. So from there, Genesis really just blossomed, and now I help employers with their drug testing policies, their prevention policies. We go on site to do their testing, and it's an all-around good feel to know that you've created a safe environment for employees and their environments.
That's a great intro to what you do. A couple of notes I made here. You had a personal story impact you very deeply,
yes.
And that's what started you on this mission.
Yes.
And a lot of businesses that are successful over the long run start that way. Either it's a personal story, or it could be a problem that you personally saw and created a better solution to, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It also sounds like the Genesis Shop has been very, very organic. You said, we started here, and then people said, well, what can you do with this? So we moved on to the next step, and so forth and so on.
Right.
Before we get deeper into that, I want you to mention exactly what the Genesis Shop does, Primarily, it's drug testing, correct? But you don't stop there. You offer a lot of other support options.
I do. Drug testing is the first step, but you have to incorporate continual drug testing, random drug testing to keep an environment clean. We go in and do reasonable suspicion training for supervisors so that they know what to look for and in the workplace, because with marketing and such now, particularly with the gummies and those kind of things coming into our market, they're here. They can be laying on your desk and you would just walk by them thinking it's a pack of candy. So we really get in depth. I stay in touch with the treatment community to see what's coming, what they're seeing, because then that's going to start impacting our community. I just now started training employees and what to look for in their children. So I'm still formatting what that's going to look like, but I have been asked to create that so that we can educate their base. Because if I'm working next to you and I see a trait, then we need to talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, it sounds like you're equal parts lab for processing drug screens, but also equal parts education.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so. I'm always reading new information that comes out. I've subscribed to just about basically anything that goes around substance abuse. And then on the other piece of it, there's market segments such as like the hotel industry. They like to do their testing in-house. So they purchase kits from me to do their own testing. I'll show them how to do it, train them, support them. And it's a real quick process. They get an instant result. So there's a lot of different variables to what I can do and provide for drug testing needs. We work a lot with the Department of Transportation. We work out at the airport. We have trucking lines that we service and go do random testing for those entities.
Okay. We mentioned a few terms earlier. I want to clarify those for the audience who might not be aware of them. You said opiate, that's also described as opioids, and I'll set this up and you can be more specific about it, but essentially around the late 80s, early 90s, the pharmaceutical companies came up with some way to synthesize basically synthetic heroin.
Yes.
And they started issuing that in the form of pain management medication. We all know the names,
Right.
OxyContin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, et cetera.
Right.
And that was a real turning point, I think, because you mentioned in your case, your family member had a legitimate injury, got a legitimate prescription for pain, and that person either has an addict's mind and they're hardwired that way or they're not, and they get that first taste or two, and it's a struggle the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah, it basically, for anybody that doesn't have that addictive brain wiring, 30 days on an opioid is going to create a problem. That's just science. That's what it's told us.
For people who don't have it.
That's correct.
It's that addictive. Oh, wow.
Yes,
So you'll become one if you use it for at least 30 days.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Didn't know that.
Right. And those that do have that addictive wiring, it could be sooner. But that 30-day is when that turning window is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. One thing we mentioned too, your business being successful, a key to that I would think is you're genuinely helping people.
Yes.
Somebody could look at you and say, "Oh, well, she gets people in trouble when they don't pass a drug test." No, this is to help them.
That's right.
Passing a drug test and learning how to deal with addiction is a benefit, not harm to someone.
That's right. And I'll give you a case point. There was a manufacturing client that we worked with that they knew they had a drug issue in their facility, and they had 3 shifts. So there were approximately 80 people that we needed to test. And when we started testing the first 10, there were 4 people positive for some substance. That is just unheard of.
40% of your first.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So, statistically, you would have 1 in 10.
So that's kind of the across the board. 1 in 10 people are going to have
1 in
trouble
10, right.
in that area, or drug tests in general.
Just in general.
Okay.
1 in 10 are going to be positive.
Okay.
So with that case, we stopped completely because they were going to lose workforce because they had a no tolerance policy because they were safety sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked with them to implement a second chance program. And in doing so, there was one of the first 10 group that they really wanted to keep him because he was a hard worker. He showed up all the time, never caused a problem, but he was positive for THC, which is marijuana. And so we worked with him to get him some counseling, and then I came back every single week and tested him just to make sure that, he was on the right track. And after about 6 weeks, we had a total negative, no substance in his system whatsoever, but he had signed a document with them that we created that for the next 6 months he would remain testing. So we would, inevitably test every 1 or 2 weeks, or, whatever they had assigned us to do. And through that process, I got to know this young man. He has a family. He has 4 children, small children.
Yeah.
And he just said, I do it to relax the anxiety. 4 kids running around, and that. And so at Christmas time came around. It was one of my last visits with him. And I bought his children toys for Christmas because, you get to know people and you know what they're doing. And he gave me the biggest hug, and he said, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you helping me through this journey. And I'm so glad that I don't need that anymore. So
Wow.
I get those heart-wrenching stories quite a bit.
For everyone listening, that is an example of your passion and your dedication, and also the difference you can make in people's lives. I would think that would separate you from a lot of your so-called competition in the drug screen.
Yeah, I really do, because I take a personal approach to it. Every client is different. Every person that I'm working with is different. I don't have that cookie cutter process going on. I have the ability to work outside the lines.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Second Chance program. Can you talk to us more about that?
Yeah, in going through what we did as a family, there's so much good resource material out there, and and putting that together and putting that into a policy, we encourage employers, let someone go to treatment, let them go through the counseling process, whether it be inpatient or outpatient. Some people can go through outpatient. That's what my son did, and it worked beautifully. So by providing them those resources with an employee assistance program, people can get the help they need. Everybody deserves a second chance.
And you're able to kind of fine-tune a specific Second Chance program for an employer based on their circumstances, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. I think, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be where I am in life had I not been given several second chances.
Exactly.
I think we've all made some mistakes we regret and done and said
Yes.
some things that we're embarrassed of. So
Yeah.
I'm really happy to hear that. One topic that's very relevant right now, and it's going on at a federal level and also a state level, is how we're going to handle THC.
Right.
I know you wanted to dive into that, so let's go ahead and do that. In interest of full disclosure, I used to partake a little bit in college, a little bit in high school, a little bit after that. Haven't touched that or alcohol in many years. I do better with a sober mind.
Yeah.
So that's just me personally. But I do think it's relatively harmless. That's my personal opinion. I don't know about you. Do you know anybody that's died from emphysema from smoking weed or lung cancer? I
No.
don't. Yeah,
No.
I mean,
And
I'm sure they're out there. But
And absolutely no one in record has overdosed from marijuana.
right, overdosed and died.
Right.
That we know of. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The whole legalization movement, I want it to be medically available to people that can't seek other means. As far as recreationally, people are doing it already. That really doesn't, I'm unbiased to that. Whatever people do on their own time is their time. What's happening, however, is how our employer's going to treat this. Somebody partakes over the weekend and we go in on a Monday and they're positive, there's really no way to tell what that usage window was. I have, since the last time we talked, partnered with a lab out in Denver that can do that. So
really?
I haven't sent anything to kind of see what their process is yet, but my industry is moving along to help employers when it comes time to make that hefty decision on whether they used it lunchtime or over the weekend.
Is marijuana unique compared to other drugs that way? It's kind of hard to pinpoint when the person consumed it, when it might be out of their system, or a lot of drugs that way?
They all are. It just
Okay.
depends on one's body metabolism, their weight, their height. There's so much that goes into see, because your test results would be different from mine if we did it through a lab-based testing.
With marijuana specifically, you've got a lot of moving parts here. We got what the federal government's trying to do with the decriminalization part.
Right.
And partially up to and including full legalization, right? You've got the states, what they're doing. I'm sure individual cities have their own ordinances on how they treat it.
Yes.
And if that wasn't enough, you've got the individual policies of the employers.
Yes.
And I would think that's a lot for someone in your field to keep track of. And I would think that's also probably a bit of a moving target for you, right?
It is. Marijuana is the number one thing we find positives on. And some employers are of the mindset that just don't test for it at all, just ignore that panel. I'm not really for that in a safety-sensitive environment.
You're operating a forklift or driving a semi-truck. That's a different story than answering phone calls in a call center, right?
Exactly. And, because there's no telling what you might say to somebody. But I did have
not going to kill anybody. Answering the phone.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I did have a client that someone was under the influence, and they were on a forklift and moving a big, pallet, and the pallet, it was from way up top, and it came down, and he mishandled it, and it fell, and he was injured. So then you get into that issue of, is workman's comp going to take care of things, or are they going to be on their own? So there's many, many, many moving parts.
And there's even more regulations involved in that specific situation because OSHA gets involved. Every time you have an incident like that, you're forced to do a drug test,
That's right, absolutely.
There's no way around that.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a good policy, right?
Yes.
You mentioned from your perspective, and I would think it is a unique perspective being in the line of work that you're in, what's your official position on marijuana? I know we've talked before, and you're kind of skeptical about recreational use, all in on the medicinal people that are suffering. You're all in on that. I want people to understand not just your position, but why you feel that way, because you see it every day. You see what most people don't when you're running these drug screenings and coordinating with these employees and these employers to get people back to work and so forth.
Yeah. Again, medicinally, I'm all in for it. I wish they just go ahead and legalize it, to be honest. Because
on the medicinal side? Or
both.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I thought you had an objection to that. Maybe I misheard you.
I do, but now that we're getting closer and closer, and I'm watching court cases, and
just do it and move on to something else more important.
Exactly. Okay. Get it regulated like alcohol is and cigarettes are.
Taxed.
Just taxed, and so every state has the same policy, because it does go from state to state, and it's just nerve-wracking.
How does that work when the federal government might say this is legal fully, but a state or city says it's not? What does that look like?
It's the federal government's going to override it.
Okay, so generally the states and the municipalities and the cities will defer to federal policy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
Because I've heard examples in other cases where that's not the case. But you think in this particular issue they'll follow suit?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do. I had my ex-husband from many, many years ago smoked marijuana on a daily basis, and they say that marijuana is not addictive, but it kind of is. It's a psychological addiction. It's not a physical addiction.
Right.
And he couldn't function without it. So we just really got to put some perspective on it and some regulation on it.
A parallel there is that person who has 2 or 3 glasses of wine 4 or 5 days a week. They might not be physiologically and biologically and chemically addicted, right? But if it's something you have to do frequently, you're addicted to some aspect of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, you mentioned the person that said he smokes weed to help relax. Well, you've replaced other, probably more healthy means of relaxing and coping with your family life and work with something, in this case, a substance, marijuana.
Right.
What are some of the things you see? One of the common terms we hear from the anti-marijuana crowd is the gateway argument that it all starts with marijuana, and next thing you know, you're eating mushrooms and snorting coke, and then 6 months later, you die of a heroin overdose. Do you see that? What's your position on that?
No, I don't know. It's not. It's not the gateway. It's pretty much 8 in 10 kids are going to try it somewhere or another.
Yeah.
And those that are prone to it will go seek other things. But no, as a hand, I've smoked it in my childhood. I never relied on it, depended on it. So I just don't see that as an issue.
You made a point earlier about the marketing of it now that it's decriminalized and legal in some states. I wanted to talk about that. They use these clever packaging, right, that it obviously appeal to children and teenagers.
Yes.
They're colorful. They've got symbols of cartoon characters on them and things like that. What have you ran into in your line of work that troubles you about that?
It troubles me because if they're left at home, and there have been instances and where a child has gotten a hold of them and they've eaten them all, and that can really play havoc on a kiddo. And
Not even the kid just thinks it's candy or
yes,
something,
exactly.
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does need to not be so appealing, but that's their momentum right now.
Yeah, and so part of that decriminalization / legalization process and then regulation and taxing would obviously be strict controls on how you can market. I remember back when I was a kid, it was cigarettes. That was the hot button issue.
Yes,
and
it was.
You had Joe Camel, and I thought
Yeah.
Joe Camel was cool,
Cool,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, he's
You
smoking
had your little candy cigarettes.
Yeah,
you could
yeah.
eat,
He's driving a
and
convertible, and he's got a beautiful woman next to him. I
Yeah.
mean, that was it's
the
hard.
Marlboro Man.
The Marlboro Man,
yeah.
the rugged outdoor, the
Cowboy
man's
hat,
man,
yeah.
right? You're not a man unless you have a cigarette
Yeah.
hanging out of your mouth.
Yeah.
It's in the alcohol companies too. You know, everybody's always partying and having a good time, and everybody's beautiful and attractive and muscular and lean, and they're all drinking Coors Light or whatever it might be. It's amazing that you can look back 20, 30 years ago and think, did that really happen? How could that have happened? You know, but it did. And it seems like we're today we're in that same area with these products. Can you talk about vaping? And we haven't talked about that and how that relates to this too, because that makes it even easier to be more attractive to people who.
Yeah, vaping, please don't do it out there. It crackles the lungs, and they're...
When you say crackle, is that a medical term?
Yes.
I never heard of that.
But it's like pockets in your lungs that makes it difficult to breathe.
Huh.
And cancer is more likely to come up.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. You know, vaping, and let's just say in the workplace or even driving down the road, somebody could have a cartridge in there that's THC, and you would never, ever know it.
So they make an odorless version of it too now?
Yeah, it is. And they're used in the workplace all the time. The way that I learned to tell the difference between a cigarette and a vape is the way the cloud goes up.
Okay.
Yeah. So
explain that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The cloud goes up. If somebody's smoking a cigarette, it's just a big poof, okay? Like a white cloud in the sky.
Evenly distributed, just.
Yes.
Okay.
And the vaping has a swirl to it.
Does it really?
Yes, it does.
Interesting.
Yeah.
As you exhale.
Yes, exactly. No,
Okay.
yeah, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
As you exhale.
Okay. The only study that I'm aware of, as I have a friend whose uncle works for the University of Louisville here, and he says we're not at the point, this was as of a year or two ago. At that time, they were not at a point where they could publish a study to say definitively that vaping is bad, but all the preliminary evidence they're coming up with all this detailed research and studying they're doing is pointing to that.
Yeah.
And it's being marketed to people as this is the safe alternative to smoking cigarettes.
Yes.
And it might be less dangerous than smoking cigarettes, but we all know the longer we've been on this planet, when you substitute one thing for another, it has its own set of perils and risks involved with that. And so I'm going to research the term crackling as it relates to vaping because I'm not familiar with that. What are some other common
You may have heard popcorn lung.
I haven't. No, I'm going to look into that.
It's the same thing, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. What are some other substances you commonly show up, you find on people's drug screens?
It really varies. The main one, second to marijuana, is cocaine.
Is it really?
We did not see, when I started the business 11 years ago, we did not see cocaine hardly at all.
And when did you start it again?
11 years ago.
Not until a decade ago.
Right. Right. Huh. And just in the last 2 years, we have seen a roaring comeback.
Really?
Yes.
Do you know why that is, or?
It's readily available, and it's cheap now. It's not the glamour drug that it was way back. Mm-hmm. It's more plentiful. With the smuggling coming from all directions into the U.S., it's easy to get it in.
Is it more pure like a lot of other drugs have become?
Yeah, but they still cut it. I mean, once it gets to the consumer, it's been cut 3 or 4 times, and they're cutting this stuff with chemicals, rat poisoning. I mean, just stupid stuff.
Baking soda.
Nobody knows what they're getting.
Yeah.
And we've all been talking about heroin for the last 5 years, and the illusion of it going away, and it's not gone away. It's still really, really bad. In the workplace, though, a heroin addict cannot function, so we don't see a ton of that. We see a lot of abuse with amphetamines. People that legitimately take them for, what their needs are.
Or ADD, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. Legitimate medical.
Yes. That those, like myself, I don't have it, but if I were to take amphetamines, I'd get such a rush and a high that I would want more. We see misuse of antidepressant drugs. We've just recently started adding that panel onto our drug screens because people do legitimately take them, but they can be abused.
What are some examples of those?
Well, you got your barbiturates, you've got your Xanax. Xanax is the main one.
Huge,
yes,
right?
it's huge.
Yeah.
So, we just see kind of all over the place on those.
Are you familiar with the term speedballing?
I am, but I couldn't really explain it to you. I know John Belushi did.
It's killed a lot of people, I think, including Chris
They go
Farley.
up and they go down.
Yeah, so it's a combination of an upper and a downer at the same time. You mentioned...
It just whacks your system completely.
You mentioned Xanax. I know a lot of people take Xanax and it stomps them down, and then they eat some Adderall and it brings them back up, or take some methamphetamine or something like that.
Yeah.
So
and that in areas of our tri-state area, particularly in southern Indiana, methamphetamine is bad. Bad.
Is that typically rural areas?
Yes.
Lower
Unfortunately,
lower income, lower level of education.
Yes.
Yeah, and then obviously heroin's pretty big out there too in the form of prescription medication.
Yeah,
and
it's
all
kind
that.
of scary when you walk through an employee parking lot and see needles on the ground and drug paraphernalia that they've discarded. And I'll just give you a little quick story. A very good friend of mine a few years back, her brother was struggling with heroin. And they thought he was, on the right track. He'd been sober for 6-7 months, and they found him in the parking lot of an emergency room, and he had OD'd. He had 2 needles in his arm. So, it's real, and it happens. And he died, unfortunately, but he was trying to get to the emergency room, but just didn't quite make it.
His time ran out.
And with Narcan now, where they can bring them out of that overdose very quickly, addicts know that. They know that the EMTs are carrying it on their vehicles. They know that the hospital. I carry Narcan with me just in case.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
So you're authorized to administer
Yes, I
it?
do. It's a 45-minute class that you can take through our health departments, and they give it to you free. So I think, particularly I'm out in the community every day, all day, so that's why I carry it. And in environments that I know that they're having issues, I carry it with me as well. And I recommend it for people just who are out and about, but addicts abuse that.
You mentioned Narcan and people taking advantage of that. That reminds me.
Naloxone, Narcan, yeah.
Okay, stop me if you've heard this. Apparently, in the last decade or so, with the proliferation of very effective and affordable and accessible treatments for AIDS, particularly in Africa, people went, after they got used to taking those and feeling safe, they went on being more promiscuous, having less unprotected sex, and then AIDS flared right back up. Have you heard that?
I have.
Yeah. That's kind of a story, kind of a case study in human nature, right?
It is, and that's the muffler that's been put on heroin, is because there's not as much, but it's not. It's the same, but Narcan is kind of like covering it up and, saying, okay, we can fix this, but it's still relevant.
And, our media gives us a lot of that information, too. And the media giveth and the media taketh away, right? Yeah. I mean, for the first, all of February and March, it was all Ukraine all the time, right? And now they don't even lead with it anymore. But the people in Ukraine are still suffering.
Yes,
and,
they are.
I think that needs to be said. I think there's a parallel there to the opioid crisis. It's still raging. You know it, right?
I know it.
You're on the front lines.
Yes, and and that's how I've kind of marketed myself, is I'm on the front line of addiction. Literally.
Yeah.
And you can walk downtown or drive downtown in certain areas and you see it. I mean, and that deep addiction creates some homelessness.
Sure.
And there's people struggling that can't get help.
And then there's a vicious cycle. Homelessness creates addiction. Addiction creates more homelessness.
And yeah, it's
on
vicious.
and on and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of things, personal stories. I have too. My best friend, he actually came on the podcast and talked about it last week. One of the nicest, kindest, most helpful and sweet people you'd ever meet, but he got caught up in the party scene, and it got progressively worse over time. And I saw it happening, and I was like, oh my God, something really bad is going to happen. Well, it happened. He got really drunk and high one night, drove the wrong way on Gene Snyder Freeway, and killed somebody. Yeah.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah, he served 6 or 7 years between home incarceration and prison. But he took that opportunity while he was in there to take and complete 2 drug rehabilitation courses. We talked about second chances earlier. And he also did therapy and to understand why he was using, because people don't understand the using is just a symptom.
Right.
There's underlying psychological,
absolutely,
underlying hurt, underlying psychological trauma.
Yeah,
a ton of that, right? And so that touched me personally, and it's actually the main reason I haven't touched anything, alcohol or weed or anything, in almost, I think we're taking almost 8-9 years now.
Yeah. It makes a big impact and impression on your life.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the second one, my former neighbor, the house we lived in before this one, his name was, I won't say their names, but their son, another example, a really sweet kid, always helpful, kind, talk to you, always wanted to come over to my house and help me do stuff that I needed, and I'd pay him, and just a great kid. But he got caught up in that stuff. And you mentioned earlier with your story, the family thought they were on the right track and things were going well. Well, they thought the same about him, and I was like, I always thought to myself, I didn't say it to him, I was like, something's not right here. These people, wishful thinking, ignorance, whatever it might be.
They're burying their heads.
This kid was dead in January at the age of 22.
Wow.
From an overdose, they found. Yeah. And that kind of hit home too, and I saw how it impacted them.
Yeah, I think my son, if we had not gotten it quicker or as quick as we did, he would have gone down that path. That's just his hyper nature, and just no fear. And he says he wouldn't have, but I think that he probably would have. So we're thankful that we were able to get him the help and real fast. So.
Well, the only difference between someone who gets out of control and something really bad happens versus someone who's out of control and it doesn't is people in that person's life that take an interest in it and look out for them. Like, he's lucky to have folks like you that, because for every instance of someone like him who has the support that he needs from his family and friends, there's probably 10 people who don't, and we know how that's going to end, right?
Yeah, you have to have a very good support system.
Ongoing too.
Yeah. And once you stop the substance, that's just the starting point. And I've done the big book study with a couple of different people that I know have struggled with alcohol,
and the big book's a reference to 12-step.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But it's for any type of addiction that people can get to know themselves and take a self-inventory and really get down to the nitty-gritty on what's going on that has caused this need to abuse a substance. Yesterday, I have a girlfriend that was here, and she had to literally leave this town to deal with her alcoholism. And I saw it, everybody around her saw it, because there are telltale signs. Even if somebody's a functioning alcoholic, there are signs that will let you know that there's something going on. And so she left and went out to Phoenix, and yesterday was her 3rd year of sobriety. So we did a big group call and FaceTimed, and she's doing fantastic. Never looked better in her life.
Isn't it amazing the turnaround people can make?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah. And sometimes that context has to shift. You can't stay around the same people in the same city. If it gets, once it crosses a certain threshold of severity, you got to get out of town.
Exactly. And we moved,
and not come back probably, right? Ever? Or
no, she comes to visit, but that's she has to stay out there. And that was the case with my son. We moved school districts. I mean, we had to get him as far away from where that issue is. Not that he couldn't find other people that are doing the same thing that he was, but at least he had an opportunity to have a second chance.
You've got to uproot them and get them out of that familiarity that's going to eventually lead back to that bad spot. Right. I heard someone say the other day, it's hard to see what the label is when you're inside the jar.
Oh, that's a good one. I haven't
Yeah.
heard that one before.
You mentioned your person was struggling with alcoholism. Everybody knew it, but she didn't, and then she finally realized. So I thought that was poignant. Something I also wanted to bring up too, and I'm not proud of this. I'm going to bring it up. I used to kind of dismiss addiction and drug addicts as being weak,
Yeah.
like mentally weak, undisciplined,
Had a bad stigma.
irresponsible people, and I kind of was like, you know what? I don't want them to die, but at the same time, I was kind of cavalier towards, well, if they're going to do it, you know, it's not my, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not proud of that. And I've since shifted on that. And people like Dr. Phil and other experts in the psychology world have changed me on that. Plus those personal stories I was telling you earlier. This is literally clinically and medically no different than a diabetic who can't process sugar that needs to take insulin.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that we're shifting as a culture towards that approach to it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. There's a need. When I do speaking engagements, I have everybody in the room show a raise of hand if they know someone, they have someone close to them, or they suspect somebody is struggling with a substance. And if they don't raise their hand, they're not being truthful to themselves, because it is with 1 in 3, 1 in 5 people, you're going to know somebody that is suffering with an addiction problem.
Directly or even indirectly with a family member or a friend.
Right,
Yeah.
or their family.
Yeah.
And I have countless stories when I was working with Operation Parent of these parents just that their children are dying of overdose and they don't even know what they took. They had no idea that, you know, this kid was flirting around with disaster, and it's just sad. And yeah, I think that stigmatism started shifting probably 9-10 years ago, that we had to start looking at it differently. And I think the treatment community has been very, very helpful. Never ever did you ever see an ad on television for a treatment facility. Now you see them, and I'll call out Landmark because I work directly with those folks, and they do a fabulous job. And so when we're working with folks and their employers, we can shift them to the best facility that we can. I think our media has been helpful in shifting that paradigm in the right direction.
You mentioned Landmark. I'm assuming you're referring to Landmark Recovery?
Yes.
Why don't we give them a plug? Tell people how they can contact them if they have a problem or they know someone that has a problem.
Yeah, they're a local regional company. They have several different facilities around the state. Landmarkrecovery.org is where you can reach them. Their main facility is on Fern Valley Road, and they are the most helpful, genuine people I could have ever met.
It takes a special person to work in
It
that
does.
type of
And, you know,
field.
speaking of that, a lot of people that have had addictive issues become counselors.
Of course.
Yes, because firsthand they've had experience with it and can help guide that person through the tribulations.
Yeah, and there's certain people, you know, we need folks who lived a clean life and played by the rules and graduated from college and got their license in psychotherapy and all. We need those folks.
Yeah.
But for a certain subset of the people impacted by addiction, only someone who's walked that path is going to get through to that person.
Right.
So you mentioned people who've actually recovered from addiction, go into helping others. I would think there's an instant credibility and authenticity that comes through.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because they share their stories. They share other addict stories. So it makes it real. And several years ago, I sat on the state board under Father Bashir, governor.
Steve?
And
Steve, is that right?
Gary Bashir.
Okay. Yeah,
Senior
Yeah.
of the drug and alcohol counseling system. And what we did is we took in applications of people that wanted to become a drug and alcohol substance abuse counselor, and we approved or disapproved. And 9 out of 10 were people that are in recovery.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to point something out for the audience. It's obvious after all the things you've done, sitting on the board for that state institution, implementing second chance programs, helping guide people through recovery and all that. There's a big difference in the service and the product you get, when you're getting it from someone who actually cares and treats each case, even though it might have a file number and come through as a certain email or whatever, you treat that as a person, a human being there, and not just a transaction.
Yeah.
I think that's important to point out.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's obvious. I mean, it's obvious. We all know when we do business with someone who actually genuinely cares and doesn't see them as another transaction, right? So I think that's an important distinction to make. One thing I wanted to mention too, when it comes to therapy and getting help, whether it be emotional trauma, addiction, whatever it might be, there's a lot of shame associated with that, right? Admitting you have a problem, only crazy people go to get help. It's actually the opposite. The real shame is in not asking for help.
Exactly.
The crazy people are the ones that it would never occur to them to go get help, right? And I think that's an important thing to point out. Dave Ramsey tells people that there's crazy in every family, and if you don't think there is, then it's you. So I think that's an important point. We wanted to shift. You also had some things you wanted to talk about regarding the legal aspect of this. And is it the federal level? You brought some notes you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I did. And I just pulled this off this morning, as a matter of fact, that there's this big argument over CBD and what levels, THC levels, it can or cannot have.
And let's clarify that for the audience in case they don't know. CBD is just a non-addictive, non-psychoactive form of, or you explain.
It's a form of the marijuana plant, hemp plant.
Yeah.
And
but it doesn't get you high.
No, it does not get you high.
No addiction aspects. Supposed to have lots of
medicinal purposes. Yeah, I use it. It's not since my knee replacement, but I used to put it on my knee to help with that inflammation and that pain, and it really does help.
And that's one form of CBD cream?
Yes.
Okay.
And it comes in all tinctures and gummies. It comes in all shapes and forms. And my granddaddy used to grow hemp back in World War II, and it's been shown throughout history how helpful hemp is and medicinal. It goes all the way back to early ancient China.
Yeah.
And our forefathers grew it. So, there's nothing wrong with the plant. And it does have medicinal purposes.
And all too often it gets lumped into the anti-weed thing, and it's not even similar to weed because there's no psychoactive effect. It doesn't get you high. There's no addiction aspect.
Right.
So what we're about to talk about is specifically CBD.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to set that up for people who don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
They were in federal court, and this means the DEA and advocates for legalizing hemp, marijuana, industrial, and so forth. And they were arguing over a 2020 DEA rule, which the agency asserts that any hemp with elevated THC levels violates the Controlled Substance Act.
Oh, and that's a serious act. That's felony
yes,
crime.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah.
The rule would effectively criminalize CBD production and virtually all hemp extraction.
Wow.
That's not good.
Did they define what elevated THC level meant, or
anything over the 0.00039 level is considered now into the THC level, and that's that big debate over the Delta 8, Delta 9 derivatives.
And so the argument being that, or the implication being rather, that most CBD products now would be disqualified based on that new definition of what elevated THC level would be?
Right.
Okay.
And, my friend I was talking about earlier out in Phoenix, when I went to visit her about this time last year, curiosity got the cat. I had to go see a dispensary. I had to try what everybody was talking about. And so nothing over that 0.00039 that they're claiming now can get you high. I ate a gummy. It didn't get me high. It relaxed me, but it didn't get me like woohoo high.
Yeah.
And there were lines around the building at these dispensaries. We visited 3 of them, and people that obviously had medical issues going on, waiting their turn to go in. They had just legalized marijuana in Phoenix, in Nevada, out that way, January of last year. And, that it's all shapes and forms. I mean, there was a brick wall just as this one, just lined with jars of, purple haze and, wacky weed or whatever that, people could put buds. And bud tenders are big deals. These people know their weed.
Oh, yeah.
And, you go in and you tell them what you want it for, what you're looking for. If you're looking for a good stoner type high that you're not like chilled out in the chair, or if you got something you got to do, you can get going.
Yeah.
It was just amazing to me. So it can be helpful, and to criminalize hemp is just ridiculous, even from the standpoint of industrialized hemp to make clothing.
Thousands of products.
Oh yeah. But then you get into that. Why are they doing that? And we all know why. They want to be able to control it and tax it. And now it was ruled on the DEA that they have no say in it. They're out of it.
So they have no jurisdiction there.
They have no jurisdiction, and that the decision should reiterate that everyone in hemp knows that Congress doesn't want hemp treated like a controlled substance.
That's a pretty strong statement.
That is a very strong statement. So I was glad that I had that. So this morning I just pulled it off right before I left to come here.
Let's do a quick history lesson here, and correct me if I'm wrong. This dates back to things like reefer madness, propaganda, a lot of religiously motivated opposition to not just weed, excuse me, but also alcohol and so forth. Am I correct in understanding that ties back to the lobbyists also? Big tobacco had a big footprint in the government and still does.
Yep.
Big alcohol, pharmaceutical companies and all that. It dates back to those guys wanting control over that area so they can exploit it financially, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Is it also one of the reasons why we're just now in the last 5 years getting electric cars? Because Detroit had so many lobbyists and lawyers and political influence in Washington.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say. Without getting too political here, I've never understood the crowd who says, well, my God and my Bible and my religion or whatever tells me I'm not supposed to do A, B, and C. That's fine. Don't do it. Why do you have to take it a step further than that and use the power of the government to stop other people from doing things? Like, you know what I'm saying? Now, there's an obvious thing we agree on, like murder and rape and theft and stuff like that. That's obvious criminal behavior. No one's arguing for that. Decriminalization of that or legalization. But I think a good parallel here is gambling. I am probably one of the most opposed to gambling people you'll ever meet. I think it's stupid personally. I don't like gambling. I think life is a gamble as it is. I might get in my car and die on the way to work today, right? I think it's a waste of money. I think these people are arguably being exploited and preyed on by these casinos. However, this is a free country, right? And if people want to go into that casino and
hand them their money
so they can build another casino that will also take advantage of them, as strongly as I am opposed to the gambling industry, A, people are going to do it anyways, and B, we live in a free country. I think there's a parallel
for
there.
Now.
Hopefully, right? Yeah. That's a kind of like addiction. You're fighting it the rest of your life, right? Hopefully, but I just don't understand the crowd that says, I don't want to do marijuana. I'm going to tell you, you can't do it also. So I wanted to get that out there because I think a lot of the opposition here is motivated and things like that. And I'll tell you something else I tell people too, and I'm not advocating for one side of the aisle or the other. In a free society, your culture and your population is always going to evolve towards more liberal views. It's just the way it is. The country as a whole today is more liberal than it was 30 years ago, and that was more liberal than it was 60 years ago, and so forth and so on. So what I'm telling people is, if you're this hardcore conservative Republican, you hate everything Democrat and liberal, get used to it because it's happening.
Yeah.
And you can pull it back. You can get your guy in office for 4 or 8 years, or gal, and you can kind of slow it down a little bit. But that is the trajectory that society and culture is on, particularly in a free society. So you might as well, you can fight it all you want, but just at least acknowledge that. Does that make sense?
It does. It's power, it's greed, and control. That's all that it bases down to. When Reefer Madness went, big in all the propaganda, that was to save the tobacco industry because there was so much money involved in it.
Yeah.
So maybe the mindset's going to come along that, hey, particularly in Kentucky, we have great soil for growing marijuana. Let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah. Humid climate too, which is good for,
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. We mentioned casinos earlier. I was thinking about, marijuana. You can object to that. That's fine. But let's put it in context. Alcohol is completely legal and has been for a long time, and we know the damage that does to people's lives. Mm-hmm. We know about drunk driving accidents. Mm-hmm. We know about cirrhosis of the liver and all types of other medical and psychological problems that either directly causes or indirectly contributes to, right?
Yes.
Cigarettes. Is there a more dangerous product on the planet than smoking a cigarette or chewing tobacco or whatever?
My goodness, no.
And it's just common, it's commonly accepted that these things are legal and people do it and you can go buy it. One thing that really impressed me with tobacco was CVS a few years ago said, we're not going to sell cigarettes anymore. You remember that?
I do.
Mm-hmm. I admired that so much because how much...
Coming from a former smoker.
Same here. I smoked cigarettes a little bit in high school and college. That took a lot of courage.
Yes.
Right? And in an open marketplace, I'm assuming CVS is a publicly traded company, their ultimate responsibility is to their shareholders and to make profit, right? Mm-hmm. Raise the value of the stock, pay a dividend to the shareholders, and move on down the road. They had to take a hit from a business standpoint, from a revenue standpoint of not selling tobacco products. I was surprised more companies didn't follow suit, like Walgreens and other companies, but
I am too, because it's not totally rare, but it's becoming more rare that people don't smoke. Mm-hmm. Now being a former smoker, and I use Chantix to quit my addiction. If I even smell a cigarette, it makes me nauseous.
It's funny you mention that. I'm in the same boat. They say that people who hate cigarettes the most are ex-smokers. Mm-hmm. I guess because psychologically you had to train yourself to hate them to quit consuming it, right?
Yes.
I always looked at it as a form of self-hatred. I was like, man, there's a lot of things I don't like about myself. Well, but I don't hate myself that much to keep smoking.
No,
that's what it is.
No, and it took a heart attack for me to wake up.
There you go. That'll do it.
Yeah.
Now, how long have you been no cigarettes?
7 years.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, almost 8.
And they say your lungs start repairing themselves almost instantly.
I have more capacity and, can do exercising and those kinds of things now that normally or when I was smoking I wouldn't have done. And we have a close friend of the family that is in late stage lung cancer, and he hasn't smoked for 40 years.
And that's the thing about it. Even if you're an ex-smoker, the damage might have already been done. Or it could have not been caused by that. It could have been genetic or some type of environmental thing. We don't know. Yep. I grew up in a house of a guy that smoked. My father smoked in the house all the time. And that was the way it was. You smoked in hospitals and airplanes.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that. Yeah, airplanes. I remember that.
Yeah. I wanted to recap our guest's information here in case you want to interact with her and learn more about her business and hopefully do some business with her. The company is the Genesis Shop. They don't just do drug screening. They offer a suite of services, support services to help not just employers but employees to help remedy the thing that happens or the consequences of a screen result. Where are you guys located?
We're on Taylorsville Road in the Stony Brook area.
Okay.
Our phone number is 502-544-7400, and you can call and just ask a question. I have people do that all the time. Can you tell me if this is, going to cause me to be positive? And just a prolifera of questions that I get. Our website is www.thegenesisshop.com. There's a contact page on there that you can actually go to, set up a phone call or a video or Zoom call, or you want to meet in person to get on my calendar.
Is there a preferred contact method, a phone call or internet? It doesn't matter to you?
It doesn't matter. I'm going to respond to it personally. I have support staff that takes care of everything else so that I can stay on the front line. And if they want to reach me by email, Lisa@thegenesisshop.com. Just shoot me something quick, and even if you just need a resource, I have tons and tons of resources, and they're on our website as well.
Support a local business that treats you like a human being and a person and not a transaction. Give them that phone number and that website one more time.
It's 502-544-7400, and the website is www.thegenesisshop.com.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I wanted to segue to our See Good to Be Good segment here. I wanted to thank you for your generous donation.
Oh, you're welcome.
To our nonprofit that my wife and I started. I like to ask people a few questions and kind of related to doing good in the community. You've obviously given back a lot through your work and also your personal life. Why are you successful?
And life, business, both.
To the extent that you've been successful, why are you successful?
Because I've been down that street of hard knocks. I've been the one that has reached out for help at points in my life. I get joy, just joy from seeing other people be successful and be healthy and live their lives as much as they possibly can to the fullest. I listen. I have an empathy heart, an empathetic heart, that I truly care about people. A lot of stuff goes on in people's lives, and if you just need to lend an ear, I will lend it.
Mm-hmm. Why are you happy?
Why am I happy? Because I spent a lot of years not happy.
Is the theme here you've learned the hard way?
Yes, it is.
You have a long list of things not to do?
Exactly.
Yeah. Final question. What obligation do you feel to give back to your community and help others who are looking for an example of either personal and or professional success?
Well, I think we all need to help each other. People struggle at different times in their life, and something as simple as giving somebody a smile as you walk past can make somebody's day. Buying a toy for their child, or supporting the Salvation for Children, Salvation
Crusade
Army.
for Children, Salvation Army, etc.
Yeah. And the angel trees. It's just, we have that in us to give back, and I think we need to open ourselves to be more of giving instead of taking and expecting. That's
great. We're told that people who aren't generous are greedy, and we kind of demonize them. I look at it a different way. I'm sad for them on what they're missing out.
Yes.
Because there's a unique form of contentment and joy and happiness you can only get from doing something for someone else, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I feel an obligation as I climb various rungs of success on the ladder of success. I don't just get there and then say, "Oh, the view here is nice." I look down and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, look how many other people are standing at the base of that." Absolutely, yeah. And every rung I climb, I feel an ever increasing obligation to help other people, because A, it honors the folks who are higher up the ladder than I am that looked down and saw me and gave me a hand, and B, those people need help.
Yes.
And I personally don't want to miss out on the feeling you get, the contentment, the sense of giving back by helping other folks.
Yep.
So I tend to word it that way. I feel sorry for folks who are greedy and not generous.
That's a good way to put it.
And I think something else needs to be said too. Financial gifts are only one form of generosity.
Yeah.
You might not have a lot of money. You might live paycheck to paycheck. You can be generous with your time.
Exactly. You
can be generous just by, like you said, you listen to people, you lend them an ear. That's a form of generosity, showing someone empathy, compassion,
right,
understanding.
Right. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Just something as simple as opening a door for somebody, or somebody that's in a wheelchair. Say hi. How hard is that to do? I just think that, I have speak from experience where I walked through part of my life like this and didn't care about anybody around me. But once I opened up and started caring about people, it's amazing how many people care back. So
yeah, it's out there. Let's give a plug for the Landmark Recovery one more time.
Okay, landmarkrecovery.org.
Okay. If you have any addiction issues, feel free to reach out to them. If you know someone, if you've been impacted directly or indirectly by addiction, please reach out. The only shame is in not asking for help.
That's right.
Not asking for help. Well, I would like to thank you again for being here, Lisa.
Pleasure.
This Miss Lisa Lee with the Genesis Shop. If you would like to be a guest on our show, or you would like help creating and or distributing your own podcast content, please contact us for more information. I'd like to thank our listeners and our sponsors for making this podcast possible and hopefully successful. And we will see you real soon on a future episode of the Respect the Math podcast.